most people listening, I'm sure, have driven a car at some point, have been in a car. We have the speedometer that keeps track of our speed, and then we have the
Mhm.
RPM that tells us how hard the engine's working. If you're driving down the road and the speed limit is 40 miles per hour, right? You look down at your speedometer to make sure you are on track, that you're not going over the speed limit. And your car is going 40 and you're like, okay, great, I'm fine. If you never look at the RPM, that's a problem. The
Yeah.
RPM is telling you how hard your engine is working to stay at that speed. So if your RPM's down at 2 and 3 or something, then you're fine, right? That would be your insulin. Your fasting insulin would be the RPM. Your glucose would be the speedometer. So we always need to look at them together. If the RPM's up at 7 or 8 for you to be going 40 miles per hour, that's a problem. And
Yeah.
that's what I do in my practice is I help women to find that connection.
Welcome to the Truth and Fertility podcast. My name is Haley and I am your host. I work at an OBGYN clinic where I teach women and couples how to chart their cycles so they can either achieve or avoid pregnancy and also to manage their fertility. I have a huge passion to teach women and couples about the beauty of their fertility and how the pill is never the answer to women's health. There's a lot of good and not so good information out there about fertility. And so my goal with this podcast is to help you sort out the truth from the weeds. I want to teach you how to chart your cycle and to reach your family planning goals while also maybe even possibly locating hormonal imbalances and to receive proper treatment. I want to help you get in the best hands that you can with the best doctors that you can to reach optimal reproductive health. So if you're ready to get on this journey with me to learn more about your reproductive system, how it was created and how it should be working, and the best medicine in order to make it work if it's not, then you are in the right place. Welcome to the Truth and Fertility podcast. Today, I have a really exciting interview. I'm interviewing Jen Winkler. She's a longtime friend, and we used to be coworkers actually over when we worked at the Catholic Diocese of Phoenix together in the marriage office. And now we're both kind of venturing out into doing our own businesses with fertility. And Jen knows a whole lot about insulin resistance, PCOS, how that affects fertility, how to use nutrition to handle and manage those things. And so I just really wanted to have her on today to really just pick her brain about that. And she does have her own health coaching business as well and her own YouTube channel. So with I will stop talking now so that Jen can introduce herself. And Jen, I'd love for you to just talk about too, like where your passion from this comes from. And I know you have a whole backstory with health. So if you wanted to go into that too, that would be awesome.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Haley. This is a real privilege to be able to be on here. So yeah, my story, I mean, I've shared it in multiple places, so I'll kind of give like a peapod, a miniature version of it. But basically, when I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. And from then on, it just wreaked havoc on my body between the seizures and the major side effects of the medication, which at that time they deemed one of the safest ones. And now hindsight's always 2020. Now it's one of the most dangerous ones that I was on. So that began to cause insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome in my body. And metabolic syndrome, and I know we're going to get into this afterwards, but basically that eventually led to PCOS as well. I wasn't
Mm.
diagnosed until I was about 25-ish, because, doctors, they don't really search during that time, especially in your teen
Yeah.
years. So it was around 25, actually, when I moved here I was in Prescott, but living here in Arizona was when they diagnosed it. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of my story in the beginning. And then a lot of weight gain, your typical PCOS symptoms of long cycles, really, really painful ones, acne, hair issues, hirsutism, all those kind of things I was struggling with. And on the side of it too is the mental health side. I think a lot of times we don't even talk about that, like how those things impact our self-esteem, but then
Mm.
also the side effects of my epilepsy medication were mainly mental health. So I had a lot going on.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to after I had my son, which I call him a miracle baby because I have no idea how I was able to get pregnant in the health that I was in. But after I had him, I was 220 pounds. I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia, massive anxiety, panic attacks, all kinds of stuff. So I started researching natural ways to heal epilepsy. And I kept coming across a ketogenic diet. And I was like, what? What is this thing? This was back in like 2017.
Okay.
So I just kind of did it on my own, like trying to figure things out, listening to podcasts. Then podcasts were becoming more popular back then, and just really self-educating. And then my husband and I did it together, and eventually I got off of majority of my epilepsy medication. I'm on a very low dose. I've never been on a dose this low, and lost over 80 pounds. My PCOS was reversed, insulin resistance was reversed, like my skin cleared up, just sleep like a rock now, like all kinds of things improved just by adjusting diet. And now it's been I don't even keep counting, but 7 years of after changing my lifestyle and diet and nutrition. And I don't adhere to it strictly anymore. Like I've been able to heal my metabolism so well that now if I feel like having an ice cream, I can have an ice cream, or like, you know what I
Crazy to
mean?
God, we can have
Yeah,
ice
like
cream.
one of those things. So a lot of people that have known me for a while, they think I'm like incredibly strict and stuff. And it's like I just learned how to get in tune with my body, where it's like, you know what, I know I need to get back into ketosis right now. I can feel it in my brain and everything. But I can also go with my son and celebrate a day and have an ice cream or something, which is rare. But I mean, the fact that I don't have guilt about it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Wow. Well, and I remember working with you, and I actually remember having a conversation with you about the keto diet. And I think that was right around the time when you were starting that. And I was like, what is this? Like, what is going on? But I remember having a conversation in our little cubicle about you starting that. So, and just look where it brought you now. Like how amazing that just that one journey. I feel like when we go on our own journeys with things, it really brings out this passion, and then crazy things happen. Like we start our own business with it.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Yeah, I
awesome.
remember those conversations, and it was just
Yeah.
like, it was also awkward because I'm bringing like buttloads of meat to work.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, or like
Yeah.
if it's Friday,
Yeah.
I would have fish, because
Right.
of meatless Fridays or whatever.
Right. Right.
So it would be weird where, it felt weird at first because I was always bringing my own lunch. I was never like buying lunch there.
Wow.
But people get intrigued and then they ask questions. And then that's
Yeah.
kind of like, we're in this Catholic space of evangelization, and then you get to evangelize health because God has given us this body and it's
Yeah.
the temple, so taking care of it, I think was really important. And there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. So we'll just continue.
That's okay. I have so many questions. So
Yeah.
but I really want to talk about nutrition and like the keto diet and how you were able to use that to manage your health. But before we get into that though, I really want you to just dive into what is insulin resistance and what is PCOS? How are those linked? Because even like I have my own podcast episodes also on my own PCOS journey, which looks a little bit different than yours, but I don't know actually a whole lot about the insulin resistance part of it. So can you just go like deep dive into that, explain exactly what that is?
Yeah, 100%. So before I dive into that part, I will throw this caveat out there that not all PCOS is due to insulin resistance. There are
Okay.
several versions of PCOS. The majority of them, though, are. So my research and understanding is about at least 80% of PCOS cases are due to insulin resistance. And they don't all look the same. Like some women, yourself included, like you're not the typical stereotype of the woman becoming overweight and obese. Like you have a really good frame. So, and then there's others who have more of an adrenal aspect to it, where that one gets a little more complicated. And then there's also gut health. So basically, the insulin resistance cases are the ones that I work with most. And then if I do figure out actually yours is an insulin resistance, adrenal, we can do some things together. But back to your question, what happens with insulin resistance is the body is becoming so inundated with glucose in our bloodstream that our pancreas is continually releasing insulin to lower it. So our blood is only supposed to have about 4 grams of sugar or glucose in our bloodstream at any time. Whenever we consume more than that, our pancreas releases insulin, and the insulin shuttles the glucose into our muscles, or it either makes it useful, or if we're just kind of sitting like we are right now, then it shuttles it into the muscles or the liver to be stored as glycogen. Now, let's say you have some really and it's not just sugar. People, whenever they hear blood glucose, they think of only like the white artificial sugar. But this is also our starches, our potatoes, our pastas, our rice, our grains, anything that has a carbohydrate content to it. So the insulin shuttles it in. Now, how does one become insulin resistant? I mean, basically, if you're overwhelming your body with too many carbohydrates and as well as inflammatory ingredients. So things like seed oils, glyphosate, things like that. So the combination of the two are what causes our cells to become resistant to the insulin. So picture like little keyholes in your cells, right? And the key goes in and unlocks the part of the cell to use the glucose. The insulin is that key that unlocks the cell so the glucose can be utilized. But if you're constantly bombarding that keyhole with different key, like another key, it eventually might get worn out a little bit. It does take a long time for that to happen. Like if you're having, tons of unhealthy carbs for a year, that's not going to cause insulin resistance. This is why it takes a while to pick it up. So the connection to PCOS, basically chronically high insulin levels in the blood, that stimulates, so insulin stimulates the ovaries to produce excess androgens like testosterone. It also decreases a protein called sex hormone binding globulin. So that is one that'll often be found to be low. And that protein binds to testosterone to keep it inactive. So when SHBG is low and free testosterone is circulating in the body, that worsens symptoms like acne, hair thinning, hirsutism, all those kind of things. So PCOS patients tend to have the high testosterone, and that's part of the reason. The other thing is the high insulin will affect the adrenal glands, and therefore DHEA, which is another androgen, will contribute to those PCOS symptoms. So there's a lot more to it too, but basically it causes the increase in androgens that will disrupt follicular development in the ovaries and therefore cause anovulation, which causes the long cycles, right? If you're not ovulating, then it's going to look like long cycles. And then, for a lot of women, the high insulin also promotes fat storage. So when insulin is high, it causes us to retain the fat that we're consuming, and the glucose gets stored into the fat cells as well. So then that'll cause a lot of overweight, obese symptoms, and then therefore metabolic symptoms, and it goes on from there.
Okay. So I want to really pick apart what you just said because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, which is good. And I really, really hope my listeners are also like, yes, please, Haley, ask the stupid questions because we don't get it either. So, okay, going back to what you said at the beginning, where insulin resistance, so when you eat too much sugar, too many carbs, your pancreas is bombarded with that. And normally your pancreas would be producing insulin to kind of balance that out. Is that right?
So your bloodstream is overwhelmed with the glucose, and therefore the pancreas releases the insulin to move the glucose out of the bloodstream, because you can't have more than 4 grams in your bloodstream. Yeah. So that's,
Okay, gotcha. And so insulin resistance, then why is it called resistance? Like what is
so your cells are becoming no, that's a good question, because it's a lot of science here. I'm totally throwing all the geeky science because that's the type of person I am. Yeah. No, it's good. So the cells of your body are becoming resistant to the insulin because it's getting bombarded so much that it's It's no longer listening. So think of it like, okay, here's the mom brain, right? When your
Yeah.
kid is like, mom, 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 you eventually start tuning out your kid's voice and they have to
Yeah.
start yelling at you
Yep.
more, and vice versa.
Yep.
The kids too turn us. So it's the same thing with the insulin, where it's like your cells slowly become resistant to hearing or to using the insulin. So your pancreas has to shoot up more and more and more and more. So
Okay.
it's there's different cases with this. Like I have a client right now who she has endo and possibly PCOS as well. But actually, yeah, she does have PCOS. And the doctors typically check a marker called hemoglobin A1C. That's like your diabetic marker,
Right.
and your fasting glucose. That's their typical thing they check. And hers was normal. And I was like, but I still want to check your fasting insulin. This is one thing I really, really want more doctors to be checking, because people can have a normal glucose and A1C, but have a sky high insulin, fasting insulin, and it only costs $10 out of pocket. So I don't know why doctors
Oh,
aren't checking it
okay.
more. But this client, her A1C was normal, her fasting glucose was normal, her fasting insulin was 68.
What
It's
is it supposed to
supposed to
be?
be conventionally, it's supposed to be below like 24, but
Oh, wow.
functionally, it's supposed to be below 7 from a functional perspective.
Oh, my
So
word.
her pancreas was really working hard and working overtime to keep that glucose. And since the insulin was so high, this was causing her to gain the weight too. Um, so yeah, there's that. I could give one more analogy if you wanted. That kind of helps
Sure.
people to see why we look at both. So most people listening, I'm sure, have driven a car at some point, have been in a car. We have the speedometer that keeps track of our speed, and then we have the
Hmm.
RPM that tells us how hard the engine's working. If you're driving down the road and the speed limit is 40 miles per hour, right? You look down at your speedometer to make sure you are on track, that you're not going over the speed limit, and your car is going 40 and you're like, okay, great, I'm fine. If you never look at the RPM, that's a problem. The
Yeah.
RPM is telling you how hard your engine is working to stay at that speed. So if your RPM's down at 2 and 3 or something, then you're fine, right? That would be your insulin. Your fasting insulin would be the RPM. Your glucose would be the speedometer. So we always need to look at them together. If the RPM's up at 7 or 8 for you to be going 40 miles per hour, that's a problem. And
Yeah.
that's what I do in my practice is I help women to find that connection. Like it's very rare you'll find a doctor that will check fasting insulin and they're like, why am I still getting weight? Why is my cycle still? Well, we need
Mhm.
to bring that insulin down. We need to bring it to normal range. It needs to stay there for a long time
Yeah.
before things get better. So
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for those, because that really helps put it in perspective and makes sense. So when you're saying, okay, now we need to bring your insulin down, is that merely, I say merely a diet change, because that's not easy, but is that your first go-to?
yes. So
Okay.
I'm very particular with my clients. Like I don't have a one size fits all with everybody. Everybody's so different. We come from different backgrounds. We have different traumas and stuff. The typical is our goal is to get the person down to below 50 grams of carbs. If they're really gung ho and they're like, I'm going to stick to it, I'm good, then, we're going to get even lower and do more of a ketogenic macro, because the ketosis can help with healing of inflammation and things like that too. It doesn't have to be permanent for them to be ketosis. It's just a tool, right? So we'll get them to lower carb. We start filtering out inflammatory ingredients. So for PCOS patients, a lot of times that's dairy too. So people think, how do you do keto without dairy? And I'm like, no, you do not need a lot of dairy to be you. It's just all those
Mhm.
fun recipes. You find lots of dairy stuff. But I tell them dairy needs to be like a garnish, where it's like maybe some Parmesan cheese on top or one slice of cheese in your wrap that you make, whatever it is, right? But we shouldn't be making like huge dairy fills, because the pasteurized and processed dairy is very inflammatory for PCOS. So there's things like that. There's the seed oils, the sugar, the grains. All of those are inflammatory and will cause the insulin to stay high as well. When we
Mhm.
remove the inflammatory ones first, there's always a huge difference. So like by default, removing the insulin. I mean, sorry, I got distracted by the window. Removing the inflammatory ingredients, the grains, the sugars and stuff, you automatically get into a low carb. They might still be having potatoes and some certain vegetable starches. And we'll
Yeah.
just see where it goes from there. Like sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we might need to remove that for a bit too. But dietary is always first. And then we move to possibly some supplementation. So, and we
Okay.
can talk about that afterwards if you want, but some supplementation. And then our third tool is definitely muscle building. The more muscle someone has, the more space they have to store that glucose and to utilize the glucose they're consuming. So, like if you go, and that's why you see bodybuilders having rice and potatoes and stuff, because they have so much muscle that it's not going to affect their insulin as much.
Yeah. Okay, that all makes a whole lot of sense. So, I do want to dive into this nutrition thing, but right before I do that, I want to talk more about PCOS though, because I want to know how, because oftentimes with PCOS, right, you have this insulin resistance. You said 80% of PCOS patients have insulin
It's somewhere
resistance. Is that
around
what you
there.
said?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so that's the majority. And so when you're having this, so many women get put on metformin, right? And that was me. I mean, I was put on metformin, and I actually, the doctor I was seeing just, my body wasn't responding to the metformin. Probably, I don't know what type of PCOS I have, but I don't think it's the typical one with insulin resistance, because she just kept increasing my metformin because we weren't seeing any changes. And I got to the point where I was at like the top dose of metformin and still like was not ovulating, really was not having any changes. And that was before I really buckled down, was like, yeah, I probably need to change my diet. So, and that was what changed everything. But so many women are put on metformin because of that, maybe just assumption that when you have PCOS, you have insulin resistance. So rather, because and I know that's not your first approach. So with PCOS, well, I guess a first question is, when a client comes to you and says, "Okay, I've been diagnosed with PCOS," how do you know that they are going to have that insulin resistance? Do you have them do blood work? Like, are you looking to see what type of PCOS they have before moving forward?
Yeah, good question. Definitely. And that's what I mean by everything's tailored. So if someone comes to me with basically any client, I don't only do PCOS. I do a lot of different hormonal imbalance
Okay.
and even just like people that are insulin resistant and don't have PCOS, right? So I do a
Yeah.
lot of that type of stuff. But I always do blood work in the beginning, always. And sometimes
Okay.
they'll, just say, "Hey, can I have my doctor do it?" I'm like, if you know they'll do it and they're not going to argue with you, sure, go for it.
Yeah.
But I have low cost out of pocket lab work that I do with clients. So I always check their fasting insulin. I always check metabolic markers, iron markers, because we want to see, and then homocysteine and B vitamins, because we want to make sure they're methylating their B vitamins properly. That's very important for PCOS.
Mhm.
So we do a full comprehensive, we'll check it all out. And then if they do have high insulin, which I have yet to have a client that did not have high
That
insulin,
doesn't- Yeah.
then okay, then we start doing the diet approaches. Also, depending on how high it is, as well as the glucose and A1C, you mentioned metformin, and we have a supplement available to us over the counter that works the same exact way as metformin, but without the side effects. And that's called berberine.
Interesting.
Berberine
Oh,
is
yeah.
very, very
Yeah.
helpful. So I will put my clients on berberine very often to lower the glucose and blood sugar spikes. Many diabetics will use it as well because that's what metformin's for diabetics. And then
Yeah.
because we know insulin resistance is the root cause of many PCOS, we say, hey, let's treat them like a diabetic. So that's
Yeah.
the aspect
Yeah.
there. But we'll do also like myo-inositol, NAC,
Mhm.
omega-3s. I mean, I want to get as much as we can from food. So omega-3s, I try to tell them like have fish at least twice a week. Then you have
Yeah.
one less pill to buy and to take, right? We want to
Yeah.
learn this
Yeah.
from nutrition. Sardines sound disgusting, but you can make them tasty, and they're one of the most nutrient dense fish you can eat. I've been diving
Yeah.
into it more often, and I've noticed certain thyroid symptoms I was having because I do that also, some thyroid work,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
all started getting better eating sardines. So, yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I'm on that level yet.
It's so
Of
easy.
sardines.
You just open the can and make it like tuna. You put like mayo, Dijon mustard, spices, and put it in a wrap with lettuce, and you can't even tell.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I'll need that recipe from you, and I'll need a little bit of motivation and confidence with that one. But okay. So let's dive into the nutrition then, because I keep saying I want to dive into that, but let's dive into it. So you're saying low inflammatory diet. How and I know I'm learning so much more about this too, because I just think like in the state of our country right now, especially in the United States with the new administration, like there's a lot being
Yes.
said
Yes, there is.
about diet and about changing our diet and some things becoming illegal, like what's it, red 40 or blue 5 or whatever those
It
ones
was
that are
red 40 should be, but it's been red food
yeah.
dye 3. And then West Virginia just eliminated all artificial colors.
Wow.
So it's
Wow.
moving. Arizona
That's
also
fantastic.
did something with the school lunches, eliminating like ultra processed foods from school lunches.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, and I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Like we're learning so much more about this, and we should be acting on that knowledge. So if somebody is going to if they're in the very beginnings and they're starting out with you and they do the blood work and they find out they have high insulin, they know they have PCOS or maybe it's endometriosis, whatever sort of reproductive issue it is, because we know, as you said, insulin affects the hormones and the hormones affects our fertility. And so what is like the base thing that you would say, okay, let's start with this, because going straight into keto, I would say is a little more difficult. And so
Mhm.
is there like a base thing to say, okay, let's cut these things out? And I know high inflammatory, like the seed oils and things like that, but it is so hard to find foods that don't have, even if it's quote unquote natural, it'll say like even applesauce, like it says like apples and then it says some sort of chemical. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't know how to read that, but that's probably not good.
It's the preservatives. Yeah, it's a preservative. There's so much I
Yeah.
can dive into here. I'm going to try my best with my ADHD brain to stay on track. So if I
Say
get
it
off,
all.
please tell me.
Say it all.
Yeah.
Say it all.
So, okay, I never have clients go straight into keto because
Okay.
then there can be some um and especially depending on their cholesterol levels. That's another thing I do check in the beginning. If they do have like high cholesterol, we want to transition very slowly over to ketogenic if that is what they need. So I take it
Okay.
step by step. So first, like I said, the inflammatory foods, the seed oils, I help them learn to read ingredients as well if they don't already have that knowledge. So things like that where you turn over the applesauce and you're like, what is that? Okay, well, we need to know which ones are normal, which aren't. But it really is a whole food perspective. So it's helping clients learn how, like maybe they didn't learn from their mom or their grandma how to make some delicious homemade soup or how to cook broccoli so it tastes good. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes
That's
it's
a
those kind
skill.
of things. Yeah, like there's
That's a skill.
I went over to someone's house and they had broccoli on the side. And when I took a bite, I was like, oh my goodness, because there was no fat added to it. Like broccoli on its own does not taste good. You need to add butter, coconut oil, bacon fat. Like, so we'll
Yeah.
learn also the healthy fats. But the foundation is you need to get healthy protein and healthy fat for your hormones. Your hormones will not function well if you're not getting enough of those. So I help to tailor that to the client. How much should that person be getting? We learn how to track food as long as it's not a trigger for them. Like if they've had eating disorder in the history, we might be a little more cautious on how we track food, macros, and things like that. Macronutrients, meaning carbs, proteins, and fats. But yeah, there's different ways to like manage that as far as what they're actually consuming. But protein animal sources are the best. And people are going to be like, oh my gosh, red meat causes cancer or high cholesterol and stuff. And that could be a whole nother rabbit hole we go down. But it does not. All the studies that show that red meat causes heart disease, cholesterol, they use red meat like lasagna, hamburgers with
Mm.
the buns, spaghetti and meatballs. It has a starchy carb source with it. They
Okay.
haven't done any studies on meat itself, like a carnivorous person. You hear people eating carnivore, right? Like
Yeah.
they haven't done studies on, there's been one study done with that, and it was
Wow.
actually a positive ending. So red meat is actually really crucial. It's where we get all our B vitamins from, almost all of them. Pork is the other one. But the majority of our healthy B vitamins come from red meat. And I'm not
Okay.
talking about the salami, the processed ones. I'm talking about your steaks, your ground beef, your tri-tip, basically the cow, like
Yeah.
you buy it from
Yeah.
there. So B vitamins from there. And it doesn't have to be grass finished. That's another, like there's so many of these rabbit holes I could go down, but grass finished in a pea pod is barely healthier than grain finished. The only difference is the omega-3 content. Everything else
Okay.
is the same. So when people say I can't afford it, go to your local Safeway, Fry's, shop the deals, whatever, it's better than the
Yeah.
alternative of what they'd be eating. So proteins, omega-3s, olive oil, go back to lard and bacon fat and tallow. Cooking with those
Okay.
are much healthier than cooking with canola. Again, you have to look at the back of the ingredients because a lot of them are laced with canola and soybean and sunflower and safflower. It'll say on the front, it's greenwashing. It'll say on the front, tallow or, olive oil. And then you look on the back and it's laced in with all these others to make it cheaper.
Will it say that in the ingredients list?
Yes, by
Okay.
law they need to. Yeah, they need to put
Okay.
it on there. It's just the greenwashing part on the front where it's like extra virgin olive oil or another one, mayo. When you buy your mayo on the front, all of them say like made with olive oil. And they're not
Mm,
lying because it is, but when you turn it over,
yeah.
the first ingredient is like canola or soybean. Soybean is very estrogenic and canola is very
Interesting.
inflammatory. So, um, but then they have olive oil in it. So that's where the
Yeah.
marketing, they're very smart with
Oh
their
yeah.
marketing. Very
Yeah.
smart. But
Yeah.
eventually you start like, I love seeing my clients progress. Like in the beginning, it's just very simple stuff. And they're like, I'm just going to start making my own yogurt. I'm just going to start making my own because
Yeah.
they realize how good they feel. And then when they go back because like, oh, this is all I got right now. And then they get their brain fog back or they get their cramps back or any of those kind of things. And then it's like, okay, I just make my own yogurt now. It's so
Hmm.
easy and it's so much cheaper. It's so, anyways, yeah, I
Yeah.
could keep
Yeah.
going. Like I
No,
told you, my ADHD brain, I was like, I could go so many directions with this.
and I want to go all of those directions. That's the problem. But it's funny that you say like people just start deciding to make their own because I tried to get on the sourdough trend, especially like during COVID and everything. And I just borrowed it. Like I have so many friends that do sourdough and they're really, really good at it. And so I just kind of like letting people know too, I do not like cooking. Like that is not one of my gifts. It's not something that I enjoy. I do it because my family needs to eat and I prefer to cook healthy things to keep my family healthy. But I'm all about just like I meal plan for the week and it's very, very simple stuff. Like I'm not crazy about cooking and stuff. And so with this whole sourdough thing, I'm like, I want to get on this train and I ended up, a friend gave me some sourdough. Well, I killed it. I just killed it because it's another living thing in my home that I have to keep alive. So I killed it. And so I'm like, okay, I want to try this again. Maybe second time's the charm. So I went to a different friend because I was like, this is embarrassing to ask this friend who I killed their sourdough. Can I have it? So I went to another friend and I got some sour and I killed that one too. And so I was just like, I am not meant for sourdough. And then finally, I'm talking to people like you, and I had another doctor on recently who was telling me about nutrition. I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I normally get sourdough from like Trader Joe's, and so I looked at the back of just the ingredients list, and there's so many things I can't pronounce on there. And I'm like, this
Mhm.
clearly is not. It's
Yeah.
not fantastic. And so I have a sourdough starter sitting in my fridge right now and I'm going to try it again. And if I kill it again, I'm done. But I'm like maybe third time's a charm. So no, I totally get like just feeling like I just want to make it myself because you can't
Yeah.
really it's hard that you can't really trust the things that you're buying from the store and eating.
No, exactly. And it's just there's like one so the grocery store thing real quick is I tell people shop around the edges of the store. So you're going like don't
Oh
go
yeah.
down the aisles, go down the vegetables, the fruits, the meats, the cheeses. It's the whole edge. Now, there's if you're going to go down the aisles, it has to be something specific, like pork rinds. I This is an easy little tip for people. If they want to, breadcrumbs, you're making meatballs or something. Pork rinds, you grind them up and it's an easy substitute for breadcrumbs. So then that's one source right there, right? If you want to,
Yeah.
the tastiest chicken you can ever make, drumsticks, you coat it just like you do, like if you're gonna bread it, and then you put pork
Yeah.
rind crumbs on it, and it's so good. Walmart
Oh,
sells them for like $3 already crushed, and they're clean, as long as you get the unflavored ones. And
yeah.
then, so things like that, things like mayo, the oils, some of those will be in the aisles, but you're not going to be going up and down all of them. You're going to have those specific condiments or the pork rinds or something. So we rarely go down the aisles, nut butters, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
it's like something for Isaac, and he eats, we don't allow the stuff in our house. It's only clean stuff. So he eats the
Yeah.
same way we eat. He does have rice and more fruits than I do, because obviously fruits do have, even though they're sugar, even though they're fruit and natural, it still
Real sugar.
turns into glucose in your blood. So I
Yeah.
limit it myself. But yeah, we try to keep it natural with him too.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. Well, we're nearing the end of our time, but I do have another question. I'm going to have plenty of questions for you. I'm going to have you on again because this is
Part
something
two.
so good. But when somebody starts changing their diet, how long should it take for them to start seeing changes, even in just like the outward symptoms of like either losing weight or the brain fog that you talked about? Like how
Yeah.
long does it take usually to start seeing improvement?
So most of my clients, within a couple weeks, they start seeing something improve.
Okay.
Most of the time, the first thing that improves is energy, brain fog, like those kind of simple, those things that I was like, whoa, I can think clearer now, or
Yeah.
I was able to just get out of bed and get moving. So most of the times it's those kind of things. They do often lose a lot of water weight in the beginning. So they might be like, I'm down 7 pounds, depending on how overweight they are. But it's not going to be 7 pounds every week. If it is, we need to change things. We don't want to lose weight that fast. That's a
Yeah.
problem. That's something else is going on. The average weight loss should be between 1.5 to 3 pounds a week, depending again on how overweight the person is. So most of the time it's more energy, brain clarity, and then it starts shifting better. Now, as far as when the PCOS is reversed, some doctors will argue that too, like you can't reverse PCOS. I don't know. Mine's gone, so I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
But that's obviously dependent on the person, because there can be much deeper root causes as well, which is one of the things I want to mention earlier, like gut health imbalance. If the person has gut dysbiosis or leaky gut, that's going to be something we'd have to work on too, with a good quality probiotic, sodium butyrate, things like that. I have different targeted supplements for those situations. But
Okay.
sometimes endo, PCOS, things like that will have that gut health root cause.
Yeah.
So, if we do all the things and they're starting to stall or symptoms are coming back, then that'll be part of it too. Oh, one other big, big key factor that one of my clients, this was her situation, was liver support, because our
Mm.
liver is so crucial at metabolizing the hormones and detoxing the estrogen. So if we are estrogen dominant, meaning having way more estrogen in ratio to progesterone, then there's probably a liver issue going on, and we need to give some added support, such as dandelion root, milk thistle, phosphatidylcholine. Things like that will help with the detoxification process.
Mhm.
So it's really like, whenever we think of these hormone things, we just think oviries, but it's our bodies. It's the whole thing. It's the
The whole
thyroid
thing.
health. We need to check how their thyroid's doing, because, is
Yeah.
there pituitary issues? So it really
Yeah.
does. But I like to try and keep it simple at first with just diet. See where it's going for a couple months. If things are on track, we just keep doing it. If things are stalling out, okay, let's dig deeper. There's some functional testing I'll do. I'll do blood work. I'll do something called the Dutch test, which is measuring the hormone metabolites that's processing. I do them together sometimes so we can see what your body's producing. That'll show up
Mhm.
in the blood. And then the Dutch test is a urine test you do at home, and it shows what you're eliminating. So if your blood is showing normal, but your urine metabolites are low, that can show a detoxification issue. You're not getting rid of the hormone that you should be getting rid of. And then it's building up in your body. So we do those, and we do gut testing. We've got a number of
Yeah.
different things. Yeah.
Wow. Man, and it really just shows how beneficial this just natural or functional medicine can be, because those are what you're saying right now are never things that I've heard of
Yeah,
of a
no,
doctor, just like a traditional doctor doing, right? So I also wanted to ask about the supplements too, because I know that you were talking about that a little bit. So I know you said you start with nutrition, and then if that's not cutting it, then would you go then to supplements? Is that kind of the next step?
always making sure they're exercising as well. So some
Okay.
sort, not hard cardio. We for women with hormonal imbalance, we don't want to be pushing that too hard. We want things that'll build the muscle, body weight exercise, lifting weights, things like that. So that'll definitely be incorporated, but supplements are targeted depending on where they are. So it's not really like the next step now is supplements. Maybe in the beginning, I might be giving them berberine right off the bat if their insulin's too
Okay.
high. Or I might be giving them myo-inositol with NAC and omegas, right? Just to kind of speed up the process a little bit. And then the Dutch test, when I do that one, there's a whole supplement line that we use according to the Dutch results. And there's mixture of like certain vitamins, minerals, and herbs to help. Things like
Okay.
Vitex, DIM, um, some calming, like if someone's very stressed all the time, we might do some adrenal support to help with that stress response. So they're
Yeah.
very targeted. And I have tried it out myself recently, not for the PCOS, but for some other things. And it is a game changer. Like, I
Wow.
cannot believe how much my my life has improved with those. So, and that's supplements, I don't believe is a lifestyle, a lifelong thing. Like it needs to be just temporary. It's what that name is,
Okay.
supplement. So if someone comes to me with a list of supplements they're taking and I say, "Why are you taking these?" "I don't know, so and so told me to take it." I'm like, "Okay, well, I can't tell you to stop it, but you need to know why you're taking it if you're taking it." You
Right.
know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Well, Jen, if you're hearing a baby noise, it is because I had to bring my baby out. So,
She's such a
but
doll.
oh, thanks. Um, Jen, thank you so much for being on today. I'm learning so much just from all these interviews, but especially just everything you said today about it's something that I've been really interested in learning more about insulin resistance and PCOS, obviously, with my own journey and really starting to change my diet, change my family's diet. So, yeah. So thank you so much. Before we go though, I want you to just share with everybody, if somebody wanted to work with you, how would they find you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. So I have my website, jenwinkler.me. I'm on Instagram, YouTube as Coach Jen Winkler. And yeah, I actually have a program coming out fairly soon. I don't know when you're going to be sharing this episode, but the registration coming out for a group coaching program will be the end of March.
Okay.
And it's basically going to be learning two aspects. One is hormone coaching, so learning how to eat properly, fast, work out, all according to where you are in your cycle. So, like, it
Mhm.
doesn't, for women, it's not the same as men. Our hormones are all over the place. So, we need to kind of adjust to where we are in our cycle. We can't be fasting for 48 hours when we're about to have our period soon. That's not how that works. So
Yeah.
you learn how to do all that, targeted supplementation, and then we also will be learning how to track your cycle through the FEM method. So it'll be
Okay.
both. And it's a 9-week program. We'll have live sessions, we'll have community support, we'll have something else I can't remember, but there's a whole bunch of things. So
Awesome.
that's a basic learning how to track your cycle so you know where you are. You can learn what your body's telling you. Like if you have a short luteal phase, like, okay, we need to figure out what's going on there. But I call it the fifth vital sign because that is what it is for women, right? Learning
Yeah.
our fertility, our biomarkers, just like we know our blood pressure, our pulse, all those kind of things. It's very important for us to know. So, yeah, if
Yeah.
people are interested, they can contact me. And it is very limited because it's a group and I want to be able to help everybody. So,
Sure.
I don't know what the limit's going to be. I think it's like 15 is the limit.
Okay.
But
Well,
yeah.
this episode should be coming out like in the middle of March, so
Okay.
middle to late March. So it'll be right around when you're starting that group group
Perfect.
coaching. So that's awesome. That is really cool. Well, Jen, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too, Haley. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the Truth and Fertility podcast. If you are enjoying this content, it would be amazing if you could leave a 5-star review. That helps me tremendously to be able to continue to produce these episodes for you. Remember that these podcasts are available on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon, and YouTube. And you can always go to my website, truthandfertility.com, to learn more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.